Under the vast starlit sky of the Arizona desert, where civilization feels like a distant memory, and the only sounds are the whispers of the wind through sagebrush, an unlikely encounter would challenge everything we thought we knew about the universe. Jack Morrison, a weathered cowboy who had spent his entire life working the land, never expected that one ordinary evening would become the most extraordinary night of his existence. What began as a routine ride across his ranch transformed into an encounter that defied logic, science, and belief itself. When a mysterious light streaked across the night sky and crashed into the canyon beyond his property, Jack made a decision that would alter the course of his life forever. He discovered something, or rather someone, that shouldn't exist according to everything humanity understands. A being from another world, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, lay helpless in the wreckage. His choice to help her would unlock secrets about the cosmos, about love, and about the extraordinary potential hidden within ordinary lives. This is the story of how one act of compassion bridged two worlds and proved that sometimes the most profound connections transcend the boundaries of space, time, and species. The sun had barely dipped below the rugged horizon when Jack Morrison guided his horse, Thunder, along the familiar trail that wound through his family's ranch. The Morrison property stretched across 15,000 acres of Arizona desert, a harsh and beautiful landscape that had been in his family for 4 generations. At 42 years old, Jack had known no other life than this one rising before dawn, tending cattle, mending fences, and falling into bed exhausted each night. His hands were calloused and scarred from decades of hard work, his face weathered by sun and wind until it resembled the very landscape he called home. He wore the same things every day: faded denim jeans, worn leather boots, a checkered shirt, and a Stetson hat that had belonged to his father. Life had a predictable rhythm here, one that Jack found comforting after the chaos he'd left behind years ago. Jack hadn't always been a solitary rancher. Once he'd had a wife, Sarah, a schoolteacher from Phoenix, who'd fallen in love with the romantic idea of ranch life, but couldn't handle the isolation and hardship of the reality. After 5 years of trying to make it work, she'd left, and Jack had let her go without much of a fight. He understood. This life wasn't for everyone. Since then, he kept mostly to himself, finding companionship in his animals and satisfaction in honest work. His only regular human contact came from his foreman, Miguel, and the handful of ranch hands who worked the property, plus occasional trips into the small town of Copper Ridge 20 miles away for supplies. On this particular evening in late summer, Jack was making his usual patrol of the northern boundary when the sky suddenly erupted in light. At first, he thought it might be lightning from a distant storm, but the quality of the light was wrong: too green, too sustained, and moving with purpose rather than flashing randomly. Thunder whinnied nervously and sidestepped as a brilliant emerald streak carved across the darkening sky, growing brighter and lower as it approached. Jack's heart pounded as he watched the object, because it was clearly an object, not a natural phenomenon arc overhead with a sound like tearing metal and displaced air. It was trailing smoke and sparks, tumbling end over end as it descended toward the deep canyon that marked the western edge of his property. The impact, when it came, shook the ground beneath Thunder's hoofs. A column of dust and debris shot up from the canyon, followed by an eerie silence that seemed to swallow all the normal sounds of the desert evening. Jack sat frozen for a long moment, his mind struggling to process what he'd just witnessed. Every rational part of his brain told him to ride back to the ranch house, call the authorities, and let someone else deal with whatever had just crashed in that canyon. But curiosity and something else, some instinct he couldn't name, pulled him toward the crash site instead. He guided Thunder carefully down the rocky path that led into the canyon, his flashlight beam cutting through the gathering darkness. The smell hit him first, an acrid, chemical odor mixed with something sweet and unfamiliar that made his nose burn. As he rounded a massive boulder, he saw it, the wreckage of something that was definitely not from this world. The craft, if it could be called that, was roughly the size of a small car, but shaped unlike any aircraft Jack had ever seen. Its surface was smooth and dark, seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it, and covered in patterns that might have been writing or decoration or something else entirely. Parts of it were torn open, revealing internal structures that glowed with a faint bioluminescent pulse, like the thing was alive and bleeding light. Jack dismounted and approached cautiously, every sense on high alert. The craft was still warm, radiating heat into the cool desert air. He could hear sounds coming from inside, not mechanical sounds, but something organic. Breathing. Labored, painful breathing. His heart racing, Jack grabbed a piece of torn metal and carefully pulled it aside to widen one of the openings in the hull. What he saw in the beam of his flashlight would haunt and amaze him for the rest of his life. She was humanoid, but distinctly not human. Her body was slender and graceful, covered in skin that seemed to shimmer with an inner light, shifting between shades of pale blue and silver. Her face, though alien in its proportions and features, possessed a delicate beauty that transcended species' large eyes that dominated her face, colored like liquid mercury and now clouded with pain, high cheekbones, and a small mouth from which came those labored breaths. Her hair, if it could be called hair, floated around her head in weightless strands of pure white light. She wore some kind of form-fitting suit that had been damaged in the crash, and through the tears in the material, Jack could see wounds seeping a luminescent fluid that he realized must be her blood. She was dying. Jack didn't need medical training to recognize that. The way her eyes struggled to focus, the irregular rhythm of her breathing, the spreading pool of that glowing blood, she wouldn't last long without help. For a heartbeat, Jack stood paralyzed by the impossibility of the situation. Then his basic human decency, the same quality that made him rescue injured cattle or help stranded travelers, kicked in. It didn't matter that she was from another world. She was a living being pain, and he couldn't just leave her to die alone in the wreckage of her ship. "Okay," he said softly, more to himself than to her. "Okay, let's get you out of there." He didn't know if she could understand him, but he kept talking anyway, using the same gentle tone he'd use with a frightened animal. Carefully, he reached into the craft, trying to find a way to extract her without causing more damage. When his hands touched her skin, he felt a shock, not electrical, but something else, a sensation like warm static that made his fingers tingle. Her eyes suddenly focused on his face with an intensity that made him catch his breath. In that moment, he felt something pass between them, recognition, perhaps, or gratitude, or simply the acknowledgement of one conscious being by another. With great difficulty, Jack managed to lift her free of the wreckage. She was surprisingly light, as if her bones were hollow like a bird's. He carried her to where Thunder waited, nervously, and managed to mount with her cradled in his arms. The horse was skittish about the strange passenger, but trusted Jack enough to obey when he urged him forward. The ride back to the ranch house took 20 minutes that felt like hours. Jack kept checking to make sure she was still breathing, that the light in her eyes hadn't faded completely. Several times, she seemed to try to speak, her lips forming shapes that produced sounds unlike any language Jack had ever heard, melodic and strange, like wind chimes mixed with whale song. When he finally reached the ranch house, Jack carried her straight to his bedroom, the only private space where he could tend to her without the ranch hand seeing. He laid her carefully on his bed and stood for a moment, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of what he'd done. He had an alien being, an actual extraterrestrial, lying injured in his bedroom. Every instinct screamed at him to call someone, but who? The government? They'd take her away, lock her up, probably dissect her to see how she worked. The hospital? How could he explain this to doctors who'd never seen anything like her? No, for now, he was on his own. Jack spent the next several hours doing his best to treat her, Injuries with the supplies he had on hand, supplies meant for horses and cattle, not alien visitors. He cleaned her wounds as gently as he could, noting how her blood seemed to coagulate and seal the injuries on its own when exposed to air. He fashioned bandages from clean cloth and kept her warm with blankets, checking her vital signs even though he had no idea what was normal for her species. Throughout it all, she drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes watching him with those incredible mercury eyes, sometimes whispering things in her musical language that he wished desperately he could understand. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Jack finally allowed himself to sit down in the chair beside his bed, exhaustion crashing over him like a wave. The alien woman seemed to be stabilizing. Her breathing was more regular. The glow of her blood had dimmed as the wounds sealed themselves, and the color of her skin had strengthened from the deathly pale it had been to a more vibrant shimmer. She was sleeping now, or at least in some state of rest, her chest rising and falling with a gentle rhythm that Jack found oddly reassuring. He looked at her in the morning light streaming through his window and tried to wrap his mind around the magnitude of what had happened. Somewhere out in the universe, there were other beings, other civilizations, other forms of life that could travel between the stars. And now one of them was asleep in his bed, alive because he'd made the choice to help rather than to fear. Jack Morrison, a simple cowboy who'd never been more than a few hundred miles from where he was born, had made first contact with an alien species. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Outside, he could hear Miguel and the ranch hands beginning their morning routines. Jack would have to go out there soon, act normal, give instructions for the day's work. But how could he act normal when nothing would ever be normal again? How long could he keep her hidden here? What happened when she recovered enough to communicate? What did she want? Where had she been going when she crashed? Did others of her kind know she was here? Would they come looking for her? The questions piled up in Jack's mind like snowdrifts, and he had answers to none of them. All he knew for certain was that his quiet, predictable life had just become infinitely more complicated. And as he watched the mysterious alien woman sleep peacefully in his bed, Jack realized he didn't regret his choice for even a moment. The first full day of harboring an extraterrestrial being in his ranch house tested Jack's nerves in ways he'd never experienced. He'd managed to slip out of the bedroom before the ranch hands arrived, locking the door behind him with an excuse to Miguel that he was unfeeling well and wanted privacy. Miguel, a dependable man in his 50s who'd worked for the Morrison family for 20 years, had given him a concerned look but respected his privacy. Jack spent the morning trying to focus on ranch business while his mind remained fixated on what, or rather, who waited in his locked bedroom. Every few hours, Jack found excuses to return to the house, checking on his unexpected guest. By midday, she had awakened fully, and the look in her eyes had changed from pain and confusion to alert wariness. She sat up in his bed, her body tensed as if ready to flee or fight despite her weakened condition. Jack approached slowly, hands visible and empty, speaking in the same calm, gentle tone he'd used the night before. "Easy now. You're safe here. I'm not going to hurt you." He had no idea if she understood his words, but something in his tone and body language must have conveyed his peaceful intentions, because gradually, incrementally, she relaxed. Over the next few hours, they established a tentative communication. She pointed to herself and made a sound that might have been her name, something like Lyra, to Jack's ears, though he suspected he was missing nuances in the pronunciation. He pointed to himself and said, "Jack," which she repeated with remarkable accuracy. She pointed to things around the room, the window, the bed, the lamp, and made sounds, apparently trying to teach him her language or learn his. Jack brought her water, which she examined carefully before sipping, and food, which she mostly left untouched after one cautious bite of bread seemed to cause her discomfort. What struck Jack most during these first interactions was how expressive she was despite the language barrier. Her large eyes conveyed so much curiosity, fear, gratitude, intelligence. When she looked at him, Jack felt truly seen in a way he hadn't experienced in years. There was no judgment in her gaze, no expectations based on who he should be or what he should have accomplished. She saw him simply as the person who had saved her, and the gratitude that radiated from her was palpable. By the second day, Lyra was strong enough to leave the bed. She moved with an otherworldly grace, her body seeming to barely touch the floor as she explored Jack's modest bedroom. She was fascinated by everything: the texture of the wooden furniture, the photographs on his dresser, the books on his shelf. She picked up an old picture of Jack and his ex-wife, studying it with intense concentration, then looked at Jack with what he interpreted as a question. "That's my wife," he said, then corrected himself. "Ex-wife." She left. It didn't work out. He wasn't sure why he was telling this to someone who couldn't understand him, but somehow it felt right to explain. The real challenge came when Lyra began to recover her strength and make clear her desire to assess the damage to her craft. Jack had been dreading this moment. He'd ridden back to the canyon the morning after the crash and found the wreckage already attracting attention scavengers, but also more concerning, military helicopters circling the area. Whatever had crashed had been detected, and people were looking. Jack had used his knowledge of the land to obscure the tracks leading from the crash site to his ranch, but he knew it was only a matter of time before someone came asking questions. Through gestures and drawings, Jack tried to convey to Lyra that her ship had been discovered, that it was dangerous for her to go there. Her reaction was immediate and distressing, those expressive eyes filled with something that looked like despair. She sank down onto the edge of the bed, her head bowing forward, and Jack heard sounds coming from her that needed no translation. She was crying. The realization that this being from another world could feel such profound emotion, could experience loss and hopelessness the way humans did, struck Jack deeply. Without thinking, he sat beside her and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. The warm, static sensation he'd felt before when touching her skin was there again, but now it seemed to pulse with her emotional state. Lyra turned toward him, and before Jack fully registered what was happening, she had pressed her forehead against his chest in what could only be described as a gesture of seeking comfort. Jack carefully, tentatively, put his arms around her, and they sat like that for a long time, a cowboy and an alien, two beings from impossibly different worlds, sharing a moment of simple human, or perhaps universal connection. That evening, as Jack prepared a simple dinner in his kitchen while Lyra watched with fascination, there was a knock at the door that made his blood run cold. Through the window, he saw a black SUV parked in his driveway, government plates. Jack's mind raced. He gestured urgently to Lyra, pointing toward the bedroom. She understood immediately and moved silently out of sight. Jack took a moment to compose himself, then opened the door. Two men in dark suits stood on his porch, along with a woman in military uniform. "Mr. Morrison?" The taller man said, flashing credentials that identified him as Agent Collins from some branch of the Department of Defense Jack had never heard of. "We're investigating an incident that occurred in this area 2 nights ago. We have reason to believe something crashed in the canyon on your property. Have you seen anything unusual?" Jack had never been a good liar, but he found himself channeling every poker face he'd ever worn in his life. Saw some lights in the sky, heard a crash, figured it was a meteor or something. Rode out to look the next morning, but didn't find much except some scorched ground and debris. He shrugged. Didn't seem like anything worth reporting. "We get strange things in the desert sometimes." The agents exchanged glances. "Mr. Morrison, if you found anything unusual, anything at all, it's a matter of national security that you inform us immediately," the woman said, her tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "We have equipment that detected biological signatures in that area. If there's any kind of contamination, any foreign material, you could be in serious danger. Biological signatures, Jack kept his expression neutral. Like what? Space germs? He forced a chuckle. Look, agents, I've been ranching this land my whole life. I know every rock and cactus. If there was something dangerous out there, my animals would be acting strange. Everything's normal as can be. He gestured toward his corrals where his horses grazed peacefully. But you're welcome to search the property if you need to. I've got nothing to hide. The agents considered this. It was a calculated risk on Jack's part. Denying a search would raise suspicion, but his ranch was vast and Lyra was hidden inside. After a tense moment, Agent Collins shook his head. That won't be necessary at this time. But we'll be conducting surveillance in this area for the next few weeks. If you see anything unusual, here's my card. He handed Jack a business card with a phone number. Call immediately. Day or night. After they left, Jack stood at the window watching the SUV disappear down the long driveway, his heart pounding. When he was certain they were gone, Lyra emerged from the bedroom. The look she gave him conveyed perfect understanding. She knew she was being hunted, and she knew Jack had just put himself at risk by protecting her. She approached him and placed her hand over his heart, the warm, static sensation intensifying until Jack felt it resonate through his entire chest. When she pulled her hand away, Jack felt different, somehow calmer, centered, as if she'd shared some of her own inner peace with him. That night, unable to offer her his bed again in good conscience, Jack set up a makeshift sleeping area for himself on the living room couch, while Lyra rested in the bedroom. But sleep wouldn't come. His mind churned with the implications of everything that was happening. He was harboring an extraterrestrial, lying to federal agents, and quite possibly committing treason or violating a dozen laws he didn't even know existed. He could lose everything, his ranch, his freedom, possibly his life. Yet, when he thought about turning Lyra over to the authorities, about those men in suits taking her away to some underground facility where she'd be studied and tested and treated like a specimen rather than a person, Jack's resolve hardened. Whatever she was, wherever she came from, she was a thinking, feeling being who deserved compassion and protection. The universe had, for some inexplicable reason, brought her to his doorstep, and Jack Morrison wasn't the kind of man to betray someone who'd been placed in his care. Around midnight, Jack heard soft footsteps and looked up to find Lyra standing in the doorway of the living room. She looked at him, then at the couch he was attempting to sleep on, then back at the bedroom. She made a gesture that clearly meant, "Come," and when Jack hesitated, she repeated it more insistently. Feeling awkward but not wanting to refuse, Jack followed her back to the bedroom. Lyra pointed to one side of the bed, then to the other, making it clear she was suggesting they share the space with clear boundaries and perfect propriety. Jack understood. In her culture, whatever it was, there was apparently nothing strange about sharing sleeping space. And truthfully, the bed was large enough for two people to sleep without any contact. He nodded and lay down on his side of the bed, staying carefully on top of the covers while Lyra settled under them on her side. The arrangement was awkward at first, two beings from different worlds lying stiffly in the dark, but gradually they both relaxed. Jack found the soft sound of her breathing oddly comforting, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel quite so alone in the big empty house. As he drifted towards sleep, Jack realized that Lyra had already begun to transform his life in ways he was only beginning to understand. His carefully constructed solitude, his predictable routine, his emotional walls, all of it was crumbling in the face of this extraordinary encounter. Whatever happened next, whatever challenges they would face, Jack knew that he would never be quite the same person he'd been before that green light had streaked across his desert sky. The transformation began on the third morning, so subtle at first that Jack almost didn't notice it. He woke to find Lyra already up, standing at the window watching the sunrise with an expression of such intense focus that he wondered what she was seeing that he could. And then, when she turned to face him, something was different. Her eyes seemed even larger, more luminous, and when she looked at him, Jack had the strangest sensation that she was seeing into him rather than just at him, reading his thoughts, his emotions, his very essence. "Jack," she said, and his heart nearly stopped. It was the first word she'd spoken that wasn't in her own musical language. Her accent was strange, otherworldly, but the word was unmistakably his name, spoken with perfect intentionality. She smiled at his shocked expression and pointed to her head, then to his, making a connection gesture with her hands. Somehow, impossibly, she was learning English, not through traditional study, but through some kind of direct mental process that Jack couldn't begin to understand. Over breakfast, which Lyra had somehow prepared using ingredients from his kitchen, creating something that looked like scrambled eggs, but glowed faintly and tasted like nothing Jack had ever experienced, she began to speak more. Simple words at first, then phrases, her vocabulary expanding with each passing hour. "I learn from you," she explained haltingly, tapping her temple. "Your thoughts, your memories, ... I see them. Not all. Just ... language. Feelings. I understand now. Why you help me." Jack should have been disturbed by this revelation that she'd been reading his mind, but instead he felt a strange relief. If she could see into him, she would know that his intentions were pure, and he genuinely wanted to help. "Can you tell me where you're from?" he asked. "Why you're here?" Lyra's expression became sad, and she gestured upward, toward the sky. Through a combination of words, gestures, and drawings that she made on paper, she began to tell her story. She was a scout, she explained, from a civilization countless light years away. Her people had been exploring this region of the galaxy, searching for worlds that might support life like theirs. She had been on a routine survey mission when her craft had been struck by something debris, perhaps, or a micrometeorite that had damaged her ship's navigation systems and sent her spiraling out of control into Earth's atmosphere. "My people. They look for me," she said, her English improving even as she spoke. "But I was ... far from flight path. They not know where I fell." Ship's beacon broken in crash. She looked at Jack with those impossibly expressive eyes. "If they not find me soon, they think me dead. They leave. Continue mission." "How long?" Jack asked. "How long before they give up looking?" Lyra held up her fingers in a counting gesture. "Your days ... maybe 10. Maybe less. Time different for my people." The implication was clear. She was stranded, possibly permanently, unless Jack could help her somehow signal her people or repair her ship's communication systems. Both options seemed impossible. That afternoon, while Miguel and the ranch hands were working the far pastures, Jack and Lyra ventured out to the canyon where her ship had crashed. Jack had been monitoring the site from a distance and knew that while government surveillance had increased in the area, the agents were focusing their search in widening circles, apparently convinced that whatever had crashed had moved or been removed. Lyra wore some of Jack's old clothes, a too large flannel shirt and jeans that she'd somehow adjusted to fit her smaller frame, and a baseball cap to hide her distinctive hair. From a distance, she might pass for human, though her graceful, gliding walk was unmistakably alien. When they reached the crash site, Lyra's emotional response was visceral. She fell to her knees beside the wreckage of her craft, her hands trembling as she touched the torn metal. The ship had deteriorated significantly in just a few days. Its bioluminescent glow had faded, and parts of it seemed to be dissolving into powder, as if it couldn't survive long in Earth's atmosphere. Lyra searched through the wreckage with increasing desperation, finally finding what she was looking for, a small crystalline device about the size of Jack's fist that still pulsed with a faint inner light. "Communication core," she said, cradling it carefully. "The only piece still alive, but damaged, weak. To repair it, I need ... She struggled for words, then seemed to search Jack's mind for the right terminology. "Rare earth elements." Specific electromagnetic frequencies. Technology you have, but not here. Not in this remote place. Jack understood the problem immediately. To repair her communicator, they'd need to go into town, possibly even to a larger city like Phoenix, where they might find electronic stores or research facilities with the components she needed. But that meant risking exposure. Every mile they traveled away from the ranch increased the chances that someone would recognize Lyra wasn't human, despite the disguise. As they discussed their limited options, still kneeling in the canyon beside the dying ship, neither of them noticed the drone until it was almost upon them. The military surveillance device swooped low over the canyon rim, its camera lens trained directly on them. Jack's heart plummeted. They'd been seen. There was no telling how much the drone's camera had captured, but it was enough to bring the agents back, probably within hours. "We have to go. Now." Jack grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her toward Thunder, who waited patiently nearby. They mounted quickly and rode hard back toward the ranch, Jack's mind racing through their options. He couldn't let them take her. He wouldn't. But where could they hide that federal agents with unlimited resources couldn't find them? They had barely reached the ranch house when Jack saw the dust clouds on the horizon, vehicles approaching fast. Multiple vehicles. "Inside," he told Lyra urgently. "Pack anything you think you need. We're leaving." While Lyra gathered her few belongings and carefully packed the communication core, Jack threw some supplies into a duffel bag: water, food, first aid kit, his rifle. He had a bolt hole, a cabin in the mountains that he'd inherited from his father, off the grid and almost impossible to find unless you knew exactly where to look. If they could get there before the agents arrived, they might buy themselves some time. But as Jack and Lyra ran toward his truck, Miguel appeared, blocking their path. The foreman's weathered face showed confusion and concern. "Jack? What's going on? Who is she?" His eyes had found Lyra, and even in her disguise, something about her must have struck him as wrong, other, alien. Miguel was a smart man, and Jack could see him putting pieces together. Remembering the crash, the government agents, Jack's strange behavior over the past few days. "Miguel, I don't have time to explain," Jack said, "but I need you to trust me. Those agents that were here before, they're coming back, and they want to take her. I can't let that happen." Miguel looked from Jack to Lyra, then back to Jack. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Miguel surprised them both. He stepped aside and tossed Jack a set of keys. "Take my truck. It's older, harder to track. Yours probably has GPS." He pointed toward the mountains. "There's an old mining road, about 3 miles past the north fence. Follow it until you can't follow it anymore. It'll get you most of the way to your daddy's cabin." He looked Jack straight in the eye. "I don't know what this is about, and maybe I don't want to. But I've known you since you were a boy, Jack Morrison. You're a good man. If you say she needs protecting, that's good enough for me." Jack felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you, Miguel." "I don't know what to—" "Go," Miguel interrupted. "I'll tell them you went into town. That'll buy you maybe an hour." He handed Jack a roll of cash from his pocket. "You'll need this. And Jack, be careful. Whatever this is, it's bigger than both of us." As Jack and Lyra drove away from the ranch in Miguel's battered pickup, Jack looked in the rearview mirror to see the black SUVs pulling up to his house. Miguel walked out to meet them, his posture relaxed and innocent, buying them precious minutes. Jack felt a surge of gratitude for the loyal foreman, mixed with guilt about dragging yet another person into this dangerous situation. Beside him in the truck, Lyra was silent, clutching the communication core to her chest. She looked frightened, an expression Jack had learned to read in her alien features over the past few days. He reached over and squeezed her hand, feeling that warm, static sensation that always accompanied physical contact between them. "It's going to be okay," he said, though he had no idea if that was true. "We'll figure this out. Together." Lyra turned to look at him, and in her eyes, Jack saw something that made his breath catch. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was trust complete, absolute trust in him. This being from another world, who had every reason to be terrified and suspicious of humans, was placing her life entirely in his hands. The weight of that responsibility settled on Jack's shoulders, but rather than crushing him, it made him sit straighter, grip the wheel tighter, drive faster. He would protect her. Whatever it took, he would keep her safe. As they left the main roads behind and started up the treacherous mining trail that would take them into the mountains, Jack realized that there was no going back now. He'd crossed the line, made himself a fugitive, abandoned his ranch and the life he'd known. Everything had changed irrevocably. And looking at Lyra's face illuminated by the setting sun streaming through the truck windows, her alien beauty more apparent than ever, now that fear had stripped away her careful composure, Jack found that he didn't regret any of it. Not even a little bit. The cabin nestled deep in the mountains was exactly as Jack remembered from his childhood visits, a small, sturdy structure of weathered wood and stone that his grandfather had built decades ago. It was primitive by modern standards, with no electricity or running water, heated only by a stone fireplace and lit by oil lamps. But it was hidden, accessible only by the narrow trail they'd barely managed to navigate in Miguel's truck. And most importantly, it was off every grid and map that existed. The first night in the cabin was tense. Jack lit a fire to ward off the mountain chill, while Lyra explored their temporary sanctuary with the same careful curiosity she'd shown in his bedroom. She touched everything: the rough wooden walls, the hand-hewn furniture, the ancient cook stove that Jack's grandmother had used with a kind of reverence that suggested she understood she was experiencing something precious, a piece of human history and craftsmanship that transcended technology. "Your people," she said slowly, standing before a faded photograph on the wall that showed Jack's grandfather standing proudly beside this very cabin. "They build with their hands, create with purpose and love." She turned to Jack. "My people, we have technology that can build anything, but we forget the meaning, the connection between creator and creation." There was a wistfulness in her voice that Jack hadn't heard before. Over the next few days, as they settled into the rhythms of cabin life, Jack learned more about Lyra and her world. She came from a civilization so advanced that they'd solved all the problems that plagued humanity: disease, poverty, conflict. But in achieving this utopia, they'd lost something essential. Her people no longer created art or music for joy, no longer formed the deep emotional bonds that humans took for granted. Everything was efficient, logical, purposeful. There was peace, but also a kind of sterility that Lyra had felt even before her crash had brought her to Earth. "I was different," she confessed one evening as they sat by the fire. "Among my people, I was, how do you say, strange. I felt things others did not. I wanted to understand emotions, connections, the chaos of feeling that we had left behind in our evolution. That is why I volunteered for exploration. I hope to find something more." "And did you?" Jack asked quietly. "Find something more?" "Yes," she said simply. "I found you." The implications of that statement hung in the air between them, unexamined and powerful. Jack tried to focus on practical matters, helping Lyra work on repairing the communication core, using what limited resources they had. But it became increasingly clear that without the specific components she needed, there was no way to signal her people before they abandoned their search. Meanwhile, the outside world was closing in. Jack had a battery-powered radio in the cabin, and the news it brought was alarming. The crash had become a national story, not the truth, of course, but a sanitized version about a downed satellite and possible foreign espionage. The government had cordoned off a wide area around Jack's ranch, and Jack Morrison himself was now wanted for questioning in connection with the incident. His face was on the news. Miguel had been interrogated, but had apparently stuck to his story that Jack had simply gone to town. The ranch hands were being questioned. It was only a matter of time before someone thought to check his father's cabin. "We can't stay here much longer," Jack told Lyra one morning. "They'll eventually search everywhere I have a connection to. We've been trying to come up with a plan, but every option seemed to lead to a dead end. They couldn't run forever. They couldn't hide forever. And they couldn't repair her ship without risking exposure. Then we must make a choice," Lyra said. She'd been standing at the cabin window, looking out at the mountain vista, and now she turned to face him. "Your life, Jack Morrison, is in danger because of me. Your home, your freedom all at risk. I will not let you sacrifice more. We must ... how do you say turn ourselves in?" "No." Jack's response was immediate and fierce. "You don't understand what they'll do to you. You'll never see your home again. You'll spend the rest of your life in a cage, being studied like an animal. And you will spend yours in prison for helping me," Lyra countered. "This is not acceptable. I will not allow you to destroy your life for mine." They argued about it for hours, their voices rising and falling in the small cabin, neither willing to budge. It was their first real disagreement, and Jack was surprised by how passionate Lyra had become, how much emotion she displayed, this being who came from a world where emotions had supposedly been bred away. She cared about what happened to him, deeply and genuinely, and that realization struck Jack with the force of a physical blow. Finally, exhausted, they fell silent. Lyra sat on the worn couch, her head in her hands, and Jack saw her shoulders shaking. She was crying again, those musical sounds of distress that needed no translation. Without hesitation, Jack sat beside her and pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, pressing her face against his chest as she had before, and Jack held her while she released her fear and frustration and grief. When she finally calmed, Lyra looked up at him, her mercury eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I do not understand what is happening to me," she whispered. "My people, we do not feel like this. We do not ... bond, but with you, I feel ... She struggled for words. Complete. Like I found a piece of myself I did not know was missing. Jack's breath caught. He knew he should be rational, should recognize that whatever this connection was between them, it was complicated by stress and danger and impossible circumstances. But looking into her eyes, feeling her warmth against him, the gentle pulse of that static energy that always flowed between them when they touched, Jack couldn't deny what he was feeling either. "I know," he said softly. "I feel it too." They sat like that for a long time, holding each other in the firelight, two impossible beings finding solace in an impossible connection. And then, slowly, tentatively, Lyra lifted her face toward his. Jack understood the question in her eyes, and his answer was to close the distance between them. When their lips met, Jack felt that warm static sensation explode through his entire body, a connection that was physical and emotional and somehow transcendent all at once. It was unlike any kiss he'd ever experienced. There was electricity in it. Yes, but also something deeper, as if in that moment their very essences were touching, recognizing each other, merging. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Lyra touched her fingers to her lips with wonder. "In my world," she said quietly, "we do not do this. We do not express connection through physical contact. We have forgotten how." She looked at Jack with something like awe. "But now I understand why your species values it. I can feel your emotions, your thoughts, your very soul in that touch. It is ... profound." That night marked a turning point. They didn't speak about what the kiss meant or where their relationship could possibly go. A human cowboy and an alien explorer seemed like the premise of a bad science fiction novel, not a viable future. But something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer just rescuer and rescued, protector and protected. They were partners, connected by something that transcended species or worlds or any rational explanation. The next morning brought crisis. Jack was outside chopping wood when he heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors echoing through the mountain valley. His blood ran cold. They'd been found. He dropped the axe and ran back into the cabin, where Lyra was working on the communication core. "They're here," he said urgently. "We have to move." But Lyra was staring at the device in her hands with an expression of shock and hope. "Jack," she breathed, "it's working." "I don't know how, but it's working. The core, it's charging, repairing itself. I can feel it connecting to my ship's network, reaching out ... She looked up at him, her eyes wide. "But I don't understand." "We didn't repair it. We couldn't. The components we needed." Jack understood before she finished the sentence. The kiss, that energy that had passed between them when they deconnected so intimately, somehow it had jump-started the alien technology. Maybe their connection had provided an energy source the device could use. Maybe there was something about human emotion, human consciousness, that was compatible with her people's technology in ways neither of them could have predicted. Whatever the explanation, the communication core was glowing brighter than it had since the crash, its crystalline surface pulsing with life. The helicopter sounds were getting closer. Jack grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, his mind calculating odds and options. If they were lucky, the helicopter was just doing a routine search pattern and would pass by. If they weren't lucky, well, Jack had no intention of letting armed agents take Lyra without a fight, even though he knew such resistance was futile and would likely end with him dead or arrested. Lyra stood beside him, still clutching the communication core. "How long?" Jack asked. "How long until it can send a signal your people will detect?" "Minutes," Lyra said. "Maybe less." "But Jack, even if they receive the signal, they are far away. Days, maybe weeks before they could reach Earth. We don't have..." She stopped as the helicopter suddenly appeared over the tree line, close enough that they could see the military markings on its side. It was heading straight for the cabin. Jack made a decision. "Go," he told Lyra, pushing her toward the back door. "Take the device and run. Head deeper into the mountains. Find somewhere to hide until your people come. I'll stay here, slow them down, give you as much time as I can." "No." Lyra grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "I will not leave you. If we are caught, we face it together. Lyra, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable." Her eyes blazed with an emotion Jack had never seen in her before: defiance, determination, and something fiercer. "You risked everything for me. You showed me what connection means, what feeling means. I will not abandon you now. We stay together, or we run together. Choose." The helicopter was landing in the clearing outside the cabin, its rotors whipping up dust and debris. Through the window, Jack could see armed soldiers jumping out, taking positions around the perimeter. They were surrounded, outgunned, and out of options. But looking at Lyra's face, seeing the absolute conviction there, Jack felt something shift inside him. Maybe they couldn't win. Maybe this was the end of the road. But she was right. They would face it together. "Okay," he said, taking her hand. The warm, static sensation flowed between them, stronger than ever. Together. The door burst open and soldiers poured in, weapons raised, shouting commands. Jack dropped his rifle and raised his hands, keeping himself between the soldiers and Lyra. An officer entered, the same Agent Collins who had questioned Jack at his ranch days before. His expression was a mixture of triumph and disbelief as his eyes found Lyra. "My God," Collins breathed. "It's real. You're real." He gestured to his men. "Secure them both. The alien comes with us. Morrison, you're under arrest for treason, obstruction of justice, and about 15 other charges we're still working on." As soldiers moved to separate them, Lyra suddenly thrust the communication core forward, and it blazed with brilliant light. The soldiers fell back, shielding their eyes. And in that moment of chaos, Lyra grabbed Jack's face with both hands. The static sensation exploded into something cosmic, and Jack felt himself falling into her mercury eyes, felt their consciousnesses touching in a way that went beyond physical sensation or emotion. Images flooded his mind. Lyra's world, distant and beautiful and sterile in its perfection. Her people, elegant and advanced and emotionally hollow. Her loneliness, her yearning for something more, something real. And then images of Earth, of him, seen through her eyes, a rough, crude, beautiful world full of chaos and emotion and life. He saw himself as she saw him, strong, kind, genuine, a being capable of compassion and courage and love. Love, that's what this was. Against all logic and reason, despite the impossible gulf between their species, they had fallen in love. And in that moment of perfect connection, the communication core reached critical mass. A beam of pure energy shot from the device into the sky, punching through the cabin roof and reaching toward the stars. It was a signal, a beacon, a message that would travel faster than light itself to wherever Lyra's people were searching. "We are here. Come find us. Hurry." The connection broke, and Jack and Lyra fell to the floor, gasping. The soldiers surged forward, separating them despite Jack's protests. They were dragged outside, pushed towards separate helicopters. Jack fought against the hands holding him, screaming Lyra's name. She was fighting too, her alien strength surprising the soldiers, her voice calling out to him in her musical language, saying things he couldn't understand but felt in his heart. As they were forced into different aircraft, as the rotors began to spin and lift them away from each other, Jack's last sight was of Lyra's face pressed against the helicopter window, her hand raised in a gesture that needed no translation. "Wait for me. I will find you. We will be together again." Then they were airborne and moving in different directions, and Jack slumped in his seat between armed guards, his heart aching with a loss he'd never imagined possible. He'd found something incredible, something that transcended every boundary he'd ever known, and now it was being torn away. But the signal had been sent. Somewhere out in the vast darkness of space, Lyra's people had heard it. And Jack had to believe, had to hold on to the hope that somehow, some way, this wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning of the next chapter. The facility they took Jack to was underground, deep beneath what appeared from the outside to be an ordinary military base in Nevada. He'd been processed, photographed, fingerprinted, and interrogated for hours before being deposited in a small concrete cell with a metal bed and little else. No windows, no natural light, no way to know if it was day or night or how much time had passed. They'd taken everything from him, his clothes, his belongings, his freedom. But they couldn't take his memories of Lyra or the hope that somehow they would be reunited. The interrogations were brutal, not physically, but psychologically. They wanted to know everything, how he found her, what she told him, what capabilities she had, where her technology was, whether there were others. Jack told them the basic facts, but omitted the emotional truth, the connection they'd shared. That was his to keep, the one thing they couldn't take from him, no matter how hard they pressed. Days blurred into weeks. Jack was given no information about Lyra, no answers to his desperate questions about whether she was being treated humanely. The not knowing was torture. Was she in a cell like his? Was she being experimented on? Was she hurt? Frightened? Did she think he'd abandoned her? The thoughts circled endlessly in his mind, driving him toward despair. It was Agent Collins who finally provided answers, appearing in Jack's cell one morning or evening. Jack had lost all sense of time with an expression that was difficult to read. "Mr. Morrison," he said, sitting down across from Jack with unusual informality. "We need to talk. I've told you everything I'm going to tell you," Jack said flatly. "This isn't about what you can tell us," Collins replied. "This is about what I need to tell you. The situation has evolved. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. The alien Lyra, as you call her, has been cooperative. More than cooperative, actually. She shared information about her technology, her people, their intentions. But she's also made a demand. She refuses to provide any more assistance unless we allow her to see you. She says ... Collins looked uncomfortable. She says you're bonded, whatever that means. That separating you is causing her physical and psychological distress, that's interfering with her ability to function. Jack's heart leaped. She was alive. She hadn't forgotten him. Then let me see her. It's not that simple. There are protocols, security concerns, political implications. The president himself is involved in decisions about how we handle this situation. But ... Double Counts Collins leaned forward. There's been a development. We've detected something. Multiple objects entering our solar system at speeds that shouldn't be possible. They're heading toward Earth. We believe they're responding to that signal Lyra sent from your cabin. Jack felt a surge of hope and fear in equal measure. Her people, they're coming. That's what Lyra says. She claims they're a rescue mission, not an invasion. She says her people are peaceful, that they only want to retrieve her and leave Earth alone. But we have no way to verify that. For all we know, we're about to face an interstellar war because you decided to play hero to a stranded alien. Collins's voice was sharp with accusation, but also something else, fear. She's not lying, Jack said firmly. Our people aren't conquerors. They're explorers. Lyra told me. What Lyra told you isn't classified intelligence, Collins interrupted. It's pillow talk from someone trying to gain your sympathy and cooperation. You've been manipulated, Morrison. No. Jack stood, anger giving him energy he hadn't felt in weeks. You don't understand what we shared. What I felt. It wasn't manipulation. It was real. More real than anything I've ever experienced. Collins studied him for a long moment. You're in love with her, he said finally, not a question but a statement. My God, you actually fell in love with an alien. Yes, Jack said simply. There was no point denying it. And she loves me. I know how that sounds. I know it's impossible and crazy and shouldn't work. But it's true. Something shifted in Collins's expression, a hint of sympathy breaking through his professional facade. The ships will arrive in approximately 48 hours, he said quietly. When they do, there's going to be a confrontation. First contact with an alien civilization. It could go a dozen different ways, most of them bad. But Lyra insists she can negotiate, can convince her people to make this a peaceful exchange. The problem is, she's not functioning at full capacity. Her emotional state is compromising her effectiveness. Because you're keeping us apart, Jack said. Collins nodded slowly. I've convinced my superiors to allow a meeting. Supervised, controlled, limited in duration. But a meeting nonetheless. If it helps stabilize her, improves her cooperation, it's worth the risk. He stood. Follow me. They walked through endless corridors, past security checkpoints and armed guards, descending deeper into the facility. Jack's heart pounded with anticipation and anxiety. What condition would Lyra be in? Had they hurt her? Changed her? Would she even want to see him? Or had she realized that their connection was a temporary aberration? A stress response to impossible circumstances? The chamber they finally entered was large and sterile, divided by a transparent barrier of some kind of reinforced material. On the other side, surrounded by monitoring equipment and observed by a team of scientists, stood Lyra. She looked diminished somehow. Her glow faded, her posture suggesting exhaustion or defeat. But the moment she saw Jack, everything changed. Her head snapped up, her eyes blazed with light, and she rushed to the barrier, pressing her hands against it. Jack, her voice was muffled by the barrier, but unmistakable. Jack, you are alive. You are well. They said you were, but I could not feel you. Could not sense your presence, I thought. She switched to her own language. a torrent of musical sounds that conveyed more emotion than words ever could. Jack pressed his own hands against the barrier opposite hers, and even through the reinforced material, he could feel a faint echo of that warm, static sensation. "I'm okay," he said. "Lyra, I'm okay. Are you? Have they hurt you?" "No physical harm," she said, switching back to English. "But the separation, Jack, is ... painful. My people, we do not bond like this. We are not supposed to be capable of it. But something happened between us. Something changed me at a fundamental level. I can feel your absence like a wound. And now that you are near again, ... double quotes, her expression was one of profound relief. Now I can breathe again." They stood like that, hands pressed to opposite sides of the barrier, eyes locked, while the scientists and agents watched with undisguised fascination. Jack was aware they were being studied, recorded, analyzed. He didn't care. After weeks of separation, seeing Lyra again, knowing she was alive and that she'd missed him as desperately as he'd missed her, was all that mattered. "Your people are coming," Jack said. "Collins told me. They'll be here soon." Lyra nodded. "Yes, the rescue fleet received my signal. But Jack, there is complication. My people, when they arrive, they will want to take me home. That is their purpose, their mission." And I ... double quote, she hesitated, her eyes reflecting a storm of conflicting emotions. "I do not know if I want to go." The words hung in the air, momentous and terrible. Behind Jack, he heard Collins draw in a sharp breath. The implications were staggering. An alien choosing to stay on Earth rather than return to her own civilization. It would change everything. The nature of contact, Earth's relationship with Lyra's people, the entire trajectory of human-alien relations going forward. "What are you saying?" Jack asked softly. "I am saying that in trying to find something more, I found everything," Lyra replied. "I found emotions I was not supposed to be capable of feeling. I found connection that my people have forgotten how to create. I found ... She pressed her hand harder against the barrier. "I found you. And the thought of losing you, of returning to my world, where everything is perfect but nothing has meaning, where I will live for thousands of your years, but never again feel what I felt in that cabin in your mountains ... double quotes." She shook her head. "I do not know if I can do it. But your family," Jack protested. "Your home. Everything you've ever known. You'd give that up to stay here? On a primitive world where you'd always be different, always be studied and questioned, and never fully accepted." "I would give it up to be with you," Lyra said simply. "If you want me to stay, if this love I feel is returned, is valued, is worth the sacrifice." Jack felt tears burning in his eyes. "It is," he whispered. "God help me, it is. But I can't ask you to make that choice. I can't be responsible for you abandoning your entire civilization. You are not asking. I am choosing." Lyra's voice was firm, certain. "For the first time in my existence, I am making a choice based not on logic or duty or the greater good of my people, but on what I feel, on what I want, on what makes me, individually, complete. Is that not what it means to be truly alive?" Behind them, Collins cleared his throat. "This conversation is being recorded and will be reported to every relevant authority. Ms. Lyra, or whatever your proper designation is, you need to understand that if you choose to remain on Earth, there will be consequences. You'll essentially be seeking asylum, which will complicate our relations with your people. You'll be subject to observation, restriction of movement, possibly detention for an indefinite period. Your life here would not be free." Lyra turned her gaze to Collins without moving her hand from the barrier where it connected with Jackass. "And what is freedom?" she asked. "To return to a world where I am free to move anywhere, but never truly free to feel anything? Or to stay in a place where my physical movement is constrained, but my heart is free to experience every emotion the universe has to offer?" She looked back at Jack. "I choose the latter. I choose to feel. I choose you." The scientists were frantically taking notes. Collins was speaking urgently into a radio. But Jack heard none of it. He was lost in Lyra's mercury eyes, seeing his own future reflected there, complicated, uncertain, probably difficult and definitely strange, but more meaningful than anything he'd imagined was possible. A cowboy and an alien. It shouldn't work. By every measure of logic and reason, it was impossible. But it was also real. "We'll figure it out," Jack said. "However long it takes, whatever we have to do to convince your people and mine that this is right, we'll do it. Together." Lyra agreed. Always together. The barrier between them seemed to pulse with the energy of their connection. And watching through the monitors, the scientists saw something extraordinary. The transparent material began to glow, responding to some kind of field that was being generated by the alien woman. Alarms started blaring as the structural integrity of the barrier weakened, and before anyone could react, there was a flash of light and the barrier simply dissolved. Lyra and Jack rushed into each other's arms, and the moment they made full contact without the barrier between them, that warm static sensation exploded into something cosmic. Every person in the room felt it, a wave of pure emotion, of connection, of love so profound it transcended species and space and every boundary that supposedly separated conscious beings. The scientists would later struggle to explain it in their reports, to quantify something that existed beyond measurement. But in that moment, everyone present understood one fundamental truth. What existed between Jack Morrison and Lyra wasn't just possible, it was proof of something greater, something that connected all intelligent life in the universe regardless of origin or evolution. The capacity to love and be loved in return. The ships arrived right on schedule, materializing in Earth's orbit in a display that was captured by every telescope, satellite, and camera pointed skyward. They were magnificent, enormous vessels that seemed to be made of liquid light, constantly shifting and reforming, more like living organisms than machines. There were 5 of them, and their appearance triggered a global crisis. Stock markets crashed. Governments mobilized. Religious leaders offered prayers. The world held its breath, waiting to see if humanity's first contact with an advanced alien civilization would mean salvation or destruction. In the underground facility, Jack and Lyra stood together before a communications array that had been hastily assembled. Lyra had been given the chance to speak directly with her people, to explain the situation. Jack stood beside her, his hand in hers, offering silent support as she prepared to change the course of history. The face that appeared on the screen was humanoid, but distinctly alien, similar to Lyra but older, with patterns of light moving beneath the skin that suggested great age and wisdom. It spoke in Lyra's musical language, and while Jack couldn't understand the words, he could read the emotion in its expression: surprise, concern, and something that might have been disappointment. Lyra responded, her voice steady despite Jack feeling the tremor in her hand. The conversation continued for several minutes, with the being on the screen asking what were clearly questions and Lyra providing answers. Finally, Lyra turned to Jack and explained in English what had been said. "This is Commander Theron, leader of the rescue fleet. I have informed him of my decision to remain on Earth with you. He is not pleased. He says I am experiencing a psychological aberration, a side effect of the crash trauma. He believes I cannot make rational decisions in my current state." She paused. "He orders me to return to the fleet for treatment and reintegration with our people." "What did you tell him?" Jack asked. "I told him that I am thinking more clearly now than I ever have before," Lyra said. "That what I am experiencing is not aberration, but evolution. That your species has something my people have lost, and I wish to learn from it, to carry that knowledge back to them eventually, but in my own time and my own way." Commander Theron spoke again, his tone sharpening. Lyra's expression became defiant as she responded. The exchange grew heated, with Theron's lights flickering in patterns that Jack recognized as agitation. Finally, Theron said something that made Lyra's face go pale, her glow dimming significantly. "What?" Jack asked urgently. "What did he say?" "He says that if I choose to remain on Earth against the direct order of my commander, I will be considered an exile. I will be stripped of my status, my family connections, everything that defines me among my people. I will be ... She struggled with the concept. Dead to them, as if I never existed. It is the harshest punishment our civilization can impose. Jack felt his heart sink. They were asking her to give up everything. "Lyra, you don't have to do this. We can find another way. Maybe I could come with you to your world." "No," Lyra said firmly. "You would not survive there. Our world, our technology, our very atmosphere is not compatible with human life. And more than that, Jack, your place is here. Your ranch, your land, your people. I will not ask you to sacrifice your world any more than I will let them force me to sacrifice mine." She turned back to the screen and spoke to Commander Theron one final time. Her voice was clear and strong, her words carrying the weight of an irrevocable decision. When she finished, Theron's expression shifted through several emotions before settling into what Jack interpreted as reluctant respect. He spoke one last time, briefly, then his image faded from the screen. "He accepts my decision," Lyra translated. "He says I am a fool, but a brave one. He will report to our High Council that I was lost in the crash. My body never recovered. To my people, I will cease to exist. But he also says ... her voice caught with emotion. He says that he hopes I find what I am seeking. That perhaps someday, when I have learned what I wish to learn, I will find a way to bring that knowledge home. That maybe I will be the one to teach our people how to feel again." The fleet departed as dramatically as it had arrived, the 5 ships accelerating away from Earth and disappearing in a flash of light that left afterimages burned into retinas worldwide. They were gone, and with them, any chance Lyra had of returning to her old life. She had made her choice, and it was final. The weeks that followed were complicated. Jack was released from custody. All charges dropped in recognition of the fact that his actions had prevented what could have been a disastrous first contact situation. His harboring of Lyra was reframed as protective custody, and he was quietly thanked by officials who publicly never acknowledged that any of it had happened. The government wanted to keep Lyra's continued presence on Earth a secret, at least for now, while they figured out how to handle the unprecedented situation. Lyra was given a kind of provisional status, not exactly a citizen, not exactly a prisoner, but something in between. She would be allowed to live freely, but under observation and with certain restrictions. She would need to check in regularly with government liaisons, allow periodic medical and scientific examinations, and accept that her existence would never be entirely her own. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than the alternatives. And most importantly, she would be allowed to stay with Jack. Miguel and the ranch hands had kept the Morrison Ranch running during Jack's absence, and when Jack finally returned home with Lyra beside him, it felt like coming back from a war. Everything looked the same but felt different, transformed by what he'd experienced. Miguel met them at the gate, his weathered face creasing into a smile that asked no questions and passed no judgment. "Welcome home, boss," he said simply, then nodded to Lyra. "Ma'am, your room's ready whenever you'd like to settle in." Over the following months, Jack and Lyra built a life together that was by any measure unusual, but for them felt completely natural. Lyra adapted to ranch life with the same curiosity she'd shown from the beginning, learning to ride horses, helping with cattle, even getting her hands dirty with the kind of physical labor her people had forgotten existed. She said it made her feel connected to the world in a way that technology never had. The soil under her nails, the ache of honest work in her muscles, satisfaction of watching something grow because of her own efforts. Jack, for his part, learned about the universe through Lyra's eyes. She told him stories of distant worlds and ancient civilizations, of wonders and mysteries that humanity was only beginning to imagine. But more than that, she taught him about connection, how the love they shared was not unique to humans or to her people, but was a fundamental force that existed throughout the cosmos, waiting to be discovered by any beings brave enough to open themselves to it. They faced challenges, of course. Small-minded people in Copper Ridge who didn't understand and didn't want to. Government agents who periodically showed up to check on their asset. Lyra's own struggles with homesickness for a world she could never return to, and grief for the family and friends she'd left behind. But through it all, they had each other, and that made everything bearable. A year after the crash, on the anniversary of the night, Jack had found Lyra broken and bleeding in the wreckage of her ship. They stood together on the ridge, overlooking the canyon where it all began. The crash site had been cleaned up, all traces of alien technology removed by government crews. But Jack and Lyra knew what had happened there, and they came to honor it, the moment when chance and choice had brought two impossible beings together. "Do you regret it?" Jack asked quietly. "Giving up everything to stay here?" Lyra was silent for a long moment, looking up at the star-filled sky where somewhere, impossibly far away, her people continued their journey through the cosmos. "Every choice involves loss," she said finally. "I have lost my past, my people, my place in the civilization that birthed me. But I have gained something more precious than all of that." She turned to face him, her mercury eyes reflecting the starlight. "I have gained a future. One filled with uncertainty and challenge and all the chaotic, messy, beautiful reality of lived experience. I have gained the ability to grow and change and become something more than I was designed to be. I have gained love." She took Jack's hand, and that warm, static sensation flowed between them, as familiar now as breathing. "You saved my life that night in the canyon. But more than that, you gave me a life worth living. How could I ever regret that?" Jack pulled her close, and they stood together under the vast desert sky. Two souls from different worlds who had found in each other something that transcended every boundary the universe could impose. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and Jack thought about how small they were in the grand scheme of things. One human, one alien on a tiny planet in infinite cosmos. But in that moment, they were also everything. They were proof that connection could bridge any distance, that love could overcome any obstacle, that sometimes the most extraordinary things happen to the most ordinary people in the most unexpected ways. Jack had been a simple cowboy, living a simple life before Lyra crashed into his world. Now he was something more, a man who had loved an alien, who had defied governments and risked everything for what he believed in, who had learned that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than he'd ever imagined. And Lyra, who had been a scout searching for meaning in the vast emptiness of space, had found that meaning in the arms of a cowboy under a desert sky. She had learned what her people had forgotten, that life was meant to be felt, not just analyzed. Experienced, not just observed. Lived with passion and purpose and the kind of reckless courage that chooses love over logic. Together, they had transformed each other's lives, just as the title of their story promised. The cowboy had saved the beautiful alien, and she had saved him right back. Not from physical danger, but from a life half-loved, from loneliness, from the slow erosion of hope and wonder that comes from too many years of simply existing rather than truly living. As they turned to walk back to the ranch house, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring, Jack realized that this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, the start of a new chapter in a story that would be told for generations to come. The story of how a chance encounter changed two lives and proved that in a universe of infinite possibilities, the most powerful force of all was the simple, profound choice to love and be loved in return. The stars watched them go, ancient and eternal, witnesses to yet another miracle in a cosmos full of miracles. And somewhere out among those stars, Perhaps Lyra's people looked toward Earth and wondered about the strange young scout who had chosen to stay behind. Perhaps they were puzzled by her choice, unable to understand what she had found that was worth such sacrifice. But if they could have seen her walking hand in hand with Jack Morrison under the endless sky, her face illuminated not by bioluminescence, but by genuine joy, they would have understood. Love was worth any sacrifice. Connection was worth any cost. And a life lived with passion and purpose, no matter how brief or complicated, was worth more than 1,000 years of empty perfection. Jack and Lyra had found that truth together, and in finding it, they had transformed not just their own lives, but opened a door to infinite possibilities. The universe was vast and strange and full of wonders, but none more wondrous than the simple miracle of two hearts recognizing each other across the impossible distance between worlds. Their story would end eventually, as all stories must. But the love they shared would endure, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and the extraordinary capacity of conscious beings to find meaning and connection, even in the most unlikely circumstances. They had saved each other, transformed each other, and in doing so, had shown both their peoples that the barriers between us, whether of species or culture or any other division, are not as insurmountable as we imagine. All it takes is the courage to reach across the divide, to offer help to a stranger, to open your heart to the impossible, and to believe that love can conquer even the vast distances between stars.